Hey guys, hope your weeks have started off well. Today we're going to be talking about um, researching how we can actually gather and use information for our informative speeches. A little update on those. Tentatively, we're planning on delivering those next week. I've debated, kind of tossed around the idea of possibly pushing those back a little bit and possibly covering content next week, but that puts things really close together. That means we would have to deliver our informative speeches and then very quickly right after take an exam. So that doesn't give you a whole lot of time in between to kind of hit the reset button in between those two large projects and get ready for the next one. So a little bit undecided about it, but obviously an imperfect semester so far, but hopefully we'll be able to power through it and still get as much out of this as we possibly can and still cover all the content that we need to. Okay. So my first piece of advice for you guys is you're getting ready for your informative speeches, right? Develop some sort of research plan, okay? First thing I'll tell you is start early. Start now. If you haven't started researching your topic yet, do it now. Figure out your topic. Start researching as early as you possibly can. Start researching yesterday. Okay. Figure out what information you're looking to gather. Figure out how you'll find this information. Right? We live in an information era. We have so much information at our fingertips, we couldn't possibly read everything that's out there. Right? So be aware of your selective exposure, selective attention, and selective retention, and how you will use it to your advantage. Keep in mind this is an informative speech, so you're looking to simply inform and educate your audience on the topic. So you're probably going to give them the nuts and bolts of certain things, right? So use your selective exposure in that way. Try to research the nuts and bolts of that topic. Focus your attention on those things, right? And naturally you'll remember those things. I'm going to talk about 5 different sources of information gathering. Number 1 is yourself. Right? People forget this a lot when they start diving into papers and speeches. Right? I told you guys in chapter 11 when we actually talked about informative speaking, pick a topic that you're passionate about and that you know something about. Right? So if you already know something about it, use your knowledge. Right? You have valuable insight. You're an intelligent human being, so use your insight on the topic. Okay. Number 2 is the internet. I recognize that probably 95% of your information is going to come from the internet, from some sort of Google search, right? That is a very valuable tool, obviously. I would encourage you guys to start to branch out from that. When I was in your shoes, that was where virtually all of my research came from, but there are tons of other quality resources around. One being the library. Get familiar with the library, right? If you haven't been to the library, get there, right? Get there. They have these things called actual books, right? Hard copies, right? With actual information in them. It's crazy, I know. Physical books actually exist, right? They're not just online, right? So get to the library, utilize the books in there, right? Another source of information gathering is an interview. You could interview an expert. I don't anticipate any of us are going to do something like that for this class. It's not necessary by any means, right? But if you are to continue on your academic career and at some point you need to interview an expert, right, that is a valuable source that can be used in your speech or your paper or whatever project you are preparing for. Okay? And then the last one is social media. Right? Unfortunately, this is a source for gathering information in our society. It's become very prevalent in our society, for better or for worse. Right? So why is it prevalent when it comes to information gathering? Well, the first reason is social media is free. Right? Anybody can access it, right? If they have access to internet, that is. Right? It's prominent in our everyday life. It's kind of woven itself into the cultural fabric of our country. Right? Anyone can post on it, so you know you're getting the best possible information, right? Not actually, right? Well, anyone can post on it. That doesn't mean you're getting great information, right? That means you could be getting information from Joe Schmo who has no idea what he's talking about, right? So I would be a little bit weary when it comes to using social media to gather information. Our textbook actually makes an argument that social media is self-monitoring. Okay? And the argument, what this actually means is that, well, social media monitors itself by if somebody puts out a story that is false or fake, right, or research that is biased or bad, people will share it, yes, but at some point somebody will realize, hey, that's a fake story. That's bad research. And they will call it out and they'll tell all their friends, and eventually word will get around that, hey, Gabe put out this bad research and we shouldn't listen to him anymore. And then eventually anything I have to say will become obsolete and irrelevant. Now, is this the way social media actually works? Absolutely not. And I can't believe our textbook actually makes this argument. I think it's kind of ridiculous, if we're being honest. There's been many studies that have really disproven this. In fact, there's been studies that have shown that fake news actually travels 5 times faster on social media than real news does. That's incredibly, incredibly concerning, right? So if you're going to use social media to gather information, I would encourage you to use social media like you use Wikipedia. And that is, it should be used in the early stage of your research, right? So how would I use both of these? I would go to Wikipedia or social media. I would look at what I see on there, and then that would guide my research, right? It would say this. I'd be like, okay, let's go see if that's actually true. Let's see what research is actually out there on that, right? Let's see if that's accurate or not, right? That is how I would encourage you to use social media and Wikipedia in general. They're not completely useless, right? But you absolutely should not be citing them as sources. A few questions to ask when gathering information. Number one, who wrote it? Who published it? How old is it? What's its purpose? And does other information back this up? Number one, who wrote it? Right? Is this an accurate, reliable source? Who published it? Right? Because a lot of times people will publish things to push a certain agenda. Right? So again, is it a neutral source that's publishing this information? How old is it? For this class, I don't want anything older than 10 years. Right? You should be able to find information and sources on topics that are have been published in the last 10 years. That should be rather easy to do, right? Unless you're talking about something like World War II, and then obviously it might be useful to travel back into time, really, and pull up some documents from that era, right? But generally speaking, nothing older than 10 years old. Okay. What's its purpose, right? So why was this information actually published? Right? And then finally, does other information back this up? Okay. That last one is really, really important because we are all creatures who fall victim to confirmation bias. We want to be told we're right. And so we'll find a source that tells us we're right, and what we'll ignore is the 25 other sources telling us we're wrong and that are actually proving the source that you agree with wrong, right? So ensure that, right, other sources are backing this up, other information actually agrees with this. Okay. A few tools in the library I just want to kind of breeze through here. Number one, books, right? I've already talked about them. Yes, actual hard copy books. They still exist. A library computer search, right? If you don't know how to do this, talk to the librarian, right? The librarians are there to help you, right? They can actually perform a library computer search where you go in, you tell them your topic, right? What information you're trying to gather, and they'll be able to search, right? A database that will tell them what books they actually have that relate to that topic, right? Very, very useful. And obviously there's online databases as well. Like, again, if you're somebody who doesn't know how to access certain online databases, go talk to the librarians. They're there for a reason, right? They're there to help you find the information that you need, so utilize them. Okay. The book's suggestion for research. State a clear purpose before you start your research, right? So again, this goes back to know what information you're actually looking to gather. Okay? Begin your research early, we've already talked about, and then maintain a bibliography of sources. Let me share something that made my life a lot harder when I was an undergraduate, right, in your shoes. I would research, whether it was for a speech or a paper or whatever, I would research a topic. I would keep just links, right, of places I got information from, right? And then at the end of the speech, I would go back and I would cite each link. The problem is, when you're talking about a research paper or a speech where you need to know exactly what information came from where, okay, I didn't actually keep track of that. So what would happen over and over again is I would spend 3 hours, right? When I actually went to put together my bibliography, I would spend 3 hours trying to figure out, okay, where did this piece of information come from? Which one of my sources did that come from? Right? So I would encourage you, maintain a bibliography of sources. If you're going to keep links, keep some small write-up where it's like this information, boom, under the link. Then you know exactly where you got the information from. When you go to do your bibliography at the end, right, it's very easy, right? You don't spend time wasting time trying to figure out what information came from where. Be more efficient. Learn from my mistakes. Let's talk about supporting materials really quickly. Okay? 4 types of supporting materials that we're going to highlight for this class. There's testimonies, examples, definitions, and statistics. Okay? I'm assuming everybody knows what a definition is. I'm assuming everybody knows what an example is. We're going to touch on testimonies and statistics very briefly. Okay? A testimony. What is a testimony? A testimony is one account of something. It's a story, right, that creates a narrative. Okay? The media is really good with testimonies. They're very good at creating narratives, whether it's Trump's a racist or Biden's an idiot, right? They're pushing a narrative of something, right? So be aware when you're using testimonies, right? Be aware of the narrative that you're creating and use that to your advantage. This is really interesting. Research shows that testimonies add trustworthiness. Right, what does that mean? It means people tend to trust people who use testimonies as supporting materials. And what research has found is that people will actually trust testimonies over hard statistics, which is bizarre to me because a testimony, again, is one account of something. Statistics are hundreds of accounts of something, thousands of accounts of something, right? And for whatever reason, if I tell some gut-wrenching story, hey, here's what happened to me, and then 999 other stories actually disagree with this, right? And we can see that with statistics, right? Maybe I'm the outlier at 0.01%, right? We can actually see this. People tend to believe the one testimony they were exposed to, right? They don't actually go and fact check and look at the statistics on things. I don't operate that way. I would encourage you guys not to operate that way because it can lead to you guys being misled in various different ways. Okay? I would encourage you to dive into statistics and actually look at hundreds of accounts of something. Okay? With that being said, testimonies should be used to reinforce our points, not make our points. Right? We're going to talk about logical fallacies later in the semester, right? And if you use testimonies to make your points, you'll be guilty of a logical fallacy called a hasty generalization. And that's where you assume a population is represented by one story or one testimony, right? And that's something that's logically incorrect. Okay? So moving into statistics. As I've already said, statistics are multiple accounts of something. Okay? Could be hundreds of accounts of something or thousands of accounts of something. Okay? So make sure your statistics, this is a little bit of advice from the book here. Make sure the statistics you provide are from credible, neutral, reliable sources. Right? So this goes back to what we already talked about here. right? Who wrote it? Who published it? How old is it? What's its purpose? Does other information back this up? So when we're talking about statistics, we're usually talking about studies, right? So all of those questions still apply. Okay. Take time to explain the statistics you use and how they relate to the topic, right? So don't just throw a pie graph up here or a bar chart, right? And not actually explain and walk through what it's actually showing, right? Now, you guys don't have to have a visual aid for this first speech here. You may need to have one for your second speech. I'm a little bit undecided on that. I've done it both ways in the past, right? But if you do end up using a visual aid for this first speech and you put some sort of statistics up on the screen, right? Be sure you're actually walking the audience through what those statistics are actually covering, what they mean, right? Not just throwing it up there, because immediately the audience, if you don't explain it, their eyes are going to be drawn to it, and while you're talking, they're going to be trying to figure out what the hell is going on behind you, right? What does that chart actually mean, and what is it saying? Okay. Use statistics sparingly. Right? We've talked about statistics being hundreds of accounts of something or thousands of accounts of something, so they're a little bit more trustworthy, right, than testimonies are. But for whatever reason, people perceive testimonies as more trustworthy. But statistics are boring. They are. So if you start throwing graph after graph after graph up here, right, your audience is going to fall asleep because they're very, very boring and they're dense. Right? Testimonies, maybe that's why people tend to believe testimonies more. They draw people in. People are paying attention when you're telling a story, right? We talked about that in chapter 11, right? Whereas statistics maybe aren't telling an in-depth story. They're generalizing a whole population. So maybe people aren't paying attention to statistics, and that's why they can't be persuaded by them, right? So use them sparingly, right? Don't lose your audience's attention, because if you don't have their attention, you can't tell them anything. Okay. Finally, round off large numbers when possible. Keep in mind that statistics help summarize complex data. We've talked a little bit in class about how intelligent people take complex things and make them simple. They take complex material and make it understandable for everyone. So statistics should be an intelligent person's best friend. Right? So get familiar with them. Right? I would also encourage every single one of you, if you haven't taken a statistics class, I would encourage you to do it for a couple reasons. One, you start to learn that statistics can easily be manipulated to say whatever you want them to say. Right? Two, you start to realize when somebody's actually doing that. Right? So you can look at a statistic and say, okay, where'd they get that from? Was that manipulated? Right? Was that an accurate study? Right? So statistics can be very, very valuable. They also can be bent, right, to make them say what you want them to say. Right? Figure out which ones are neutral, reliable, right, and aren't being manipulated to support a certain opinion. That's all I have for you guys today. This is kind of a shorter chapter. It's really kind of a blend between Chapter 8 and Chapter 9 in the textbook. But again, not overly dense when it comes to information. I assume you students are all very intelligent and know how to research in general, right? These are just some ideas, right, that you can springboard off of. If you're somebody who has a way of researching things that has worked for you in the past, absolutely feel free to continue to research things that way and maybe incorporate one or two things that we talked about today. That's all I have for you guys today. I will upload another lecture here on Wednesday, so be on the lookout for that. We're going to talk about managing our anxiety when speaking in front of people, which is something that I think will be very, very valuable leading into our informative speeches, as none of us have spoken at length in front of the class yet.